This episode may contain language or discussions that may be offensive or triggering. Refer to the episode summary for details. And welcome to the SheConfidential podcast. My name is Charlene Ketchum, and today I'm chatting with Dr. Nikki. She is a Psychpac credentialed licensed psychologist and self-confidence coach. Y'all, I kept tripping over that Psychpac credentialed part, but I learned something new about that, what that actually stands for, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to let you know that today, Dr. Nikki and I are going to be focusing on how Black women can overcome the internalized misogyny that might be blocking them from claiming their sexual identity. Before we launch into that, let's talk about what the Psychpac credential means.
Sure. So thank you so much, Harleen, for having me. I'm so excited to be in this space and have this conversation. And thank you for the opportunity for education. So SciPac credential means that as a licensed psychologist, I have access to do virtual sessions. You might hear people refer to it as telehealth
Okay.
therapy across state lines, right? So my license is in the state of Texas. So I can see folks face to face, obviously, in the state of Texas. But with this SciPac, I can see folks in about 24 other states across the country, including Georgia, North Carolina, the entire DMV, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Illinois. I'm trying to hit the highlights where I know there are big Black populations.
Yes. I think,
Yes.
yeah, Missouri. And I'm going to make sure I include that list because I know you've got it on your site. So
Yes, I
I'll include
do.
that list in the description so that people know all the states where you have that licensure and they could work with you.
Yes. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I love the expansion to access to services, particularly as it relates to Black clinicians and mental health professionals, because we know y'all are in short supply and high
We
demand.
are. We
And
are.
just so what's the status on that? Because I know you mentioned that it's available in 24 states. So is that
hmm
expanding? And
So
is that
it's going, yeah. So it goes state by state. So a couple things. One, I think it's kind of ridiculous that we don't have this sort of reciprocity across states like
Mhm.
other professionals. That's a whole different podcast and conversation. And then just for clarification, this is only for people licensed as psychologists, right? So if you're LCFW, LMFT, LPC, licensed mental health clinician, there's nothing that exists currently
Okay.
that does that. So, and then SIPAC is going state by state, so they actually have to enter these agreements with the particular states. And so it makes sense that you don't see California on the list, New
Yeah.
York on the list, Florida, and there's another big state that I'm blinking out on. And I think it's in part to sort of keep down competition.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where, right, like
Hmm.
inclusivity and equity is a different conversation. So, sure, there might not be at all a dearth of therapists for white folks in California or New York, but trust me, there's a dearth of Black mental health professionals in those spaces. I get requests all the time for people in California or New York, or somebody saying, I got a friend in California, who can you recommend? And it's just, there's not a lot of Black clinicians, right?
Right.
To go around. And that's a problem. You know, we I think as Black clinicians have been doing a lot of work.
Hmm.
Therapy for Black girls has been a game changer, right? For
Yeah.
talking about therapy and normalizing therapy for us. And then folks are trying to find somebody, and it's like, I don't see anybody that looks like me.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody that I feel like I can show up and be my full self in therapy. And
Yeah.
that matters so very much.
It really does. And even beyond when we're talking about ethnicity or race, when we start talking about and just because I've discovered not every therapist has that comfort or that ability to just be able to even offer that support and insight. Like cultural competency is a really big thing in that.
Listen, I I was an academic for 17 years of my career.
You have you written a book on it? Because you could. Right.
This is the question I get so often, and I'm listening, universe. I am. I'm listening. I have so many things I want to talk about, and that is part of it. So I trained and so because of my passion for therapy, right?
Yeah.
I taught classes like um, basic counseling and therapy skills, called pre-practicum or practicum, when you're out, when students are out seeing folks for the first time, and group therapy, theories of therapy. I would teach these classes, and trust and believe this idea around cultural competence does not come naturally. That therapists have a lot of biases and they show up in the therapeutic space
Yeah.
as well, and they have to be intentional and
Mm.
active about working to continue to inform themselves and check their own worldviews. And unfortunately, it just really doesn't happen. I think in the level proportionate to the amount of folks that need the service. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It doesn't. That's, I mean, it's, and especially around when we start talking about things related to Black women, because there is so much that's been taboo for us to even talk about amongst
yes,
ourselves, much
yes.
less go and talk to a therapist. Even though you all are professionals, you still have this fear of judgment. I remember the very first time I went to go see a therapist, and it was after my dad had passed away, and I was so embarrassed because
Hmm.
I was having panic attacks at the time, and I didn't really know what they were. It was just like these crying spells and stuff, and then I would
Hmm.
wake up in the middle of the night having all these different things, and I was really embarrassed. And for because I'd never gone through anything like that before, and I was like, I
Right.
don't want to go see and I saw a psychiatrist, and I was like, I don't want them to think that I need to be put on medicine, and or that I can't control my feelings, or that I'm just this dramatic person or anything. And so I didn't even tell her about the panic attacks until a few
Mm.
sessions in, because I didn't want her to think something was like really really wrong with me.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and so you have that fear.
It's real. I always like support and celebrate my clients when they show up in their authenticity and their vulnerability. And for clarification, my clients are all black. So I work
Yeah.
predominantly with black women, a couple black men, and then couples. And that's not 100%. I have a couple mixed race couples, but typically black women are
Yeah.
people who come to me because they know that's what I do.
Hmm.
And so I know what that's like, right? I know
Yeah.
how difficult it is to be vulnerable, even in the space when you've decided to create space
Hmm.
for yourself to get help. But being able to
Yeah.
say it out loud and actually look at it, and then so much of our experience as black women is the rest of the world looking at us from the outside, judging. And the reality is the
Hmm.
judgments are always never enough, either too much or never enough, right? There's never a really safe space for us to be our full human complicated selves. And so
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense that even in a therapeutic space, you come with that level of shame or worry or discomfort with vulnerability, because that has been your experience in any of every other place. So when I know that they're sharing things with me that they may have never shared with other people, I take that place as being very sacred. Like that's an honor for
Yeah.
me, and it serves as a reinforcement for me that I am working and operating in my purpose.
Yes.
And that always just is so affirming for me in ways that I can never fully articulate. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. That's And that's a lovely thing for you to acknowledge, that recognition that people are being brave with you,
hmm,
being brave, like sharing parts of themselves they've never shared before, and
yeah,
overcoming so many of those limits and mindsets and barriers. Because we as Black folks, we grew up being told what happens in this house stays in this house.
hmm,
And some of the most painful things that happen to you, you are trained, conditioned not to
yes,
talk about,
yep,
especially with
exactly.
outsiders.
Exactly. And you're sort of socialized not just explicitly in those messages, but implicitly, right? How
Yes.
you observe other people in your
Yep.
family community moving
Yes.
says a lot too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we most of our messages
Yeah.
are a mix of explicit, direct, and implicit sort of indirect messages.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is, especially with regard to like sex positivity and sexual shame, sometimes the messages are mixed. You saying one thing but doing another. So which one am I? Which one is right? What we doing?
Yeah.
That creates a lot of confusion
Yeah.
for people in general, but certainly for women. Um, and I work a lot with high achieving black women,
Hmm.
which most black women are high achieving. Let me just, if you're
Yeah.
listening, and
Yeah.
you're like, I don't know if that's me, it is.
It is.
It
Yeah.
is. And what happens oftentimes I see repeated over and over again is all of these other parts of yourself that needed to be seen in the world, um, as holding up the community, being
Hmm.
resilient, being quote unquote successful. They
Yeah.
are very, not necessarily unimportant, but they tend to be external and sometimes superficial things, right? Did you get good grades in school? Did you do well in college? Do you
Yeah.
have an advanced degree? Are you
Hmm.
killing it in your profession?
Yeah.
Do you have a side hustle? Are you starting your own business? Are you a good wife? Are you a
Yeah.
good mom? Like all of these roles and
Hmm.
labels, and then attending to yourself, like what do I need, what do I want, what brings me pleasure. That's never a part of
Yeah.
the socialization process. And so you get all of this esteem and reward and fulfillment in these other areas, and then there's this other part of yourself that has never been nurtured, never even been given consideration.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I've been able to achieve XYZ A B and C, this should be easy, right? And that the internal work
Yeah.
is never as easy. And I'm speaking from not just the psychologist side, but I'm
Hmm.
also a client, right? So I have a black woman psychologist that I
Hmm.
see, and even in doing my own work, I'm like, there it is again. I'm doing it to myself again. Like it's an
Yeah.
ongoing process because there's so much reinforcement to not do the internal work, so much reinforcement to
Yeah.
keep up the status quo. And a lot of us end up walking around sort of really disconnected from ourselves,
Hmm.
and a lot of times carrying a lot of pain and shame and
Yeah.
self-doubt and feelings of unworthiness, but on the outside you would never know it.
Rocking it. Looking good,
Lashes,
able to carry,
brows,
got your
hair.
Louis Vuitton bag, you've literally secured the bag, literally and figuratively.
Yes. And inside you're like, I wish I had a soft space to land.
Yeah.
I wish somebody would pick up some of this slack for me.
Yeah.
I wish I knew what I really wanted. I wish I could
Yeah.
ask for what I really wanted.
Yes. Yeah. That
So,
part. That's and that's why on this podcast we talk about everything. Like the focus for She Confidential is on all of the components of wellness and personal development. And as you know, that ranges from everything from environmental considerations to physical, mental, emotional, sexual, everything, your social aspects related to your friendships and your intimate partnerships, your family, all
mm-hmm.
those things, and your career and your finances, all those things matter. But as
Yes.
Black women, a lot of times we have to compartmentalize so much of ourselves. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I have to show up as the mom, or I have to show up as the high achieving, child that's first person to go to college, and so I can't mess up. I got to do
Yep.
everything quote unquote right. Whether it's what the church is telling you is right or what your grandma is telling you is right. You're trying to
Mm-hmm.
defy these statistics that they hurl at us. You're trying to overcome all these generational curses. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
so fixated on proving the haters wrong and living up to everybody else's dream, you
Yep.
don't get to connect with your own. You're neglecting all these other parts of yourselves. Because I know for
Absolutely.
me, for many years, I was professionally rocking it out. But the
Mm-hmm.
better I did professionally, the worse I was doing, the more I was neglecting myself physically and emotionally and mentally. And even getting disconnected from just having fun. Like
Yes.
just doing fun, just being silly, just doing
Yes.
silly shit sometimes.
Yes.
Who like
Yes.
celebrates that? Like once you get conditioned to be good or be perfect or be,
Mm-hmm.
on your A game all the time, it's hard to turn that switch off.
It is extremely difficult because it's not just the conditioning. It's a what I call it's a reflexive process. There's the conditioning that then changes your internal standard that then gets rewarded externally. So you want to be rewarded. That's human nature. It's human
Yeah.
nature to want to be rewarded. It's human nature to want to be celebrated. And so the more that happens, the more you do that thing, and then you get better at it. And so it
Yeah.
just happens more and more. So this whole other part of yourself, or parts really.
Yeah.
But I really love the connection you were making just now about just having fun, which is why I talk about, yes, I'm a sex therapist and sex self confidence coach, and I always talk about joy and pleasure. I put them
Yes.
together because the greater your capacity to build your own standard, your repertoire of things that bring you joy and pleasure, the greater that you have access to having more sexual pleasure. Sex is one of the buckets, right? But
Yes.
what I want is for Black women to feel fully empowered that things that bring them joy and pleasure are they are worthy of just because. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to work for it. It's not a reward. It is just because it's part of your experience as being a full and complete human, just like everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do we shift from that mindset? I mean, first we have to acknowledge like where is the sources of those shame. So
Yes.
in your from your background as an academic and then as a clinician, where are a lot of those sources of shame even coming from?
Everywhere.
It's like
Literally
where do
everywhere, everywhere. And so let's first acknowledge that collectively, in we live in a sex negative culture in the United States. We even though sex is everywhere, it's only allowed to be promoted or acceptable in certain sort of containers, right?
yeah.
And so that tells a message from early on about who is allowed to have sex and when and what are the conditions. And
Yeah.
we sort of have that's what we teach, but then we also have these lots of ways that we reinforce that. And so what the research shows is in the early part of our lives, our parents and family and community have primary influence on our ideas about ourselves as sexual beings, and also related to that are primary sources of messages around sexual shame. And then we have religion. And then as you also get older in life, the media and then your peers also
Mm.
reinforce that. So when I say everywhere, I mean, it's literally everywhere, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like the parents get everything started, your family and community reinforce that. The church says this is what you do. And then as you get older, you have those voices take a back seat, but they have had foundational impact, right?
Right.
And then your peers, and then your the media that we consume. And media is TV, film, music, lyrics, the social media, um,
Yeah.
all of those things serve to reinforce that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So which is why I like this conversation about alpha males and all these alpha male podcasts and high value men and high value women is so effing toxic, because it's the all it is regurgitating shame.
Mm-hmm.
It just has some new words on it, but
Mm-hmm.
all it is doing is saying over and over again, hey, woman, your body needs to look a certain way, and
Yep.
it only needs to be accessible to me. And you also need to have all of these material, objective things, but not too much, because you have to make me feel better. And
Mm-hmm.
then forget how you feel about yourself. It's about your sole goal in life should be to please me, right?
Yeah.
It just heaps on the shame, 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 shame.
Yeah. It's and interestingly, before you and I started recording, also a friend and I were talking earlier, just about men and how they complain. Some men complain about their dislike of body shapers and makeup and extensions, and they're like, why can't women just be themselves?
That's the same thing. Too much or not enough. You got too much shape, too much eyelash, too much hair extensions, too much. I like a woman with stretch marks and her natural skin and her natural hair. Well, good for you. But what
Yeah,
about what that woman likes?
yeah,
What
Yeah.
about that? Or we're all trying to have meet a certain body standard, right? Have all this internalized negativity about our bodies because media has and our families have also told us to be desirable to a
Mm-hmm.
man, you need to be in this body. You need to
Yeah.
be this size. You need to have this shape. And the
Mm-hmm.
craziest part about the black community is you can't be too skinny, but you also can't be too big.
Woo. Yeah.
It's
It's
constant
a lot.
pushing, pushing, pushing. Yes.
Yes. It's a lot. It's a
It's a
lot.
lot.
I said to somebody not too long ago, I said, what I have realized is that the only thing that I can do is live within my body in a way that's most comfortable for me.
That's
And my
it.
priority is to have a body that allows me to enjoy my life to the max. So that's
That's
not
it.
about a particular number on the scale, but it is
No.
about me having the health and mobility that allows me to live my fulfilled life to the max. And so that's going to
Yes.
look different at different seasons in my life. And that's going to look
Mhm.
different for every person. But what that also means is that I'm not setting a standard based on somebody else's desires or preferences. I'm going to be me, and then I'll attract who vibes with me.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
But let me ask you, do you think you could have do you think you could have been in the world with that mindset at age 20?
Oh my God, no. So what's so crazy is when I was 20, so I'm 41 now. When
Okay.
I was 20, I always, first of all, I always thought I was fat. Like I
Mm.
literally always used to say to myself, like, "Oh my God, I'm fat. I need to lose weight." I
Mm-hmm.
remember even thinking of being conscious of what I was eating when I was 8 or 10. I've always kept a journal, and so when I look at my
Mm.
journal, and the more I grow and learn about the importance and significance of what we say to ourselves, I'm
Yeah.
like, man, I actually talked negative to myself for a really long time. But
Yep.
back then, that's when they sold the diet pills and they had the commercials on
Mm-hmm.
TV. So diet culture
Mm-hmm.
was, really normalized, and you would hear adults talking about it. And in the black
It's still
community,
normalized. Let me
it
pop it. It's still
is.
normalized. We just talk about it as eating clean
Yes,
and 30-day vegan challenges and keto and intermittent fasting, but it's still diet culture.
it is. We just
It's all diet
changed the
culture.
words. It's true.
That's
It's.
it.
I mean, yeah. I never liked my body, and even when I started to develop, and I've shared this on the show before, but it's relevant to this discussion. So even when I used to go back to school shopping, I developed a butt and hips early. And
Mm-hmm.
so my mom, and she didn't mean any harm by it because this is just how she was conditioned and she was trying to keep me safe. But when we went back to school shopping, I would have to try everything on and we would go get stuff probably like in June or so and we put it up in layaway. And then I could
Okay.
get it out in September when school started. So we go in June, I try all these things on and she had to look and see if it was fitting me, if you could see my body.
Mm-hmm.
And if it did, okay, we got to get a bigger shirt to cover up your butt or go up a size. And so just the act of having to go try on clothes to see
Yeah.
what would help hide me so that I
Yeah.
didn't prompt a certain response, it really did condition me because at school it was like this LL Cool J song about big old butts. And
Yes.
this boy, I won't say his name, but I've never forgotten it. Plus, it's in my diary. Always sang
Mm.
that song and put my name in it. And it used to embarrass me so
Mm.
bad that I didn't play jump rope because he was like, "Oh, your butt jiggling." Now I can laugh about it. At the
Yeah.
time, I didn't. It embarrassed me so
Mm.
bad. And I said that to a guy friend, even in high school, when people would say things like that. And he's like, "Well, that really bothered you?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it did. Because I had always been like super conscious of my body. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just want to be. You don't want to think about people looking at you and critiquing you in a sexual way. Because, for one
Yes.
thing, I wasn't comfortable with that. And I wasn't even comfortable in my own body because I had always been taught that you don't want men looking at you
Right.
because then bad things can happen and it's your fault because you made
Yeah.
it possible for them to see you. And so
Absolutely.
at 20, oh, I was still deep into that.
No.
Even though it's like I looked in, I'm like, oh, my body was amazing and I ate ice cream all the time. Like I
My
didn't
God, when I think
exercise.
about the things I did in my 20s, in
Woo!
undergrad and in my 20s, like going out and staying out and eating IHOP at 4 in the
Yep.
morning or eating Popeyes at 3 in the morning. And like it was nothing.
The metabolism.
Baby, let
It's
me
just
try to do that today and see won't I be up half the night. I couldn't even sleep, right?
no.
Um, but I asked that question because what I find happens is we have been, and I'm gonna always use we, right? Because I'm a therapist and I have all of this knowledge and expertise because that's my responsibility to be a competent professional. But I do the work that I do with Black women because I am it, extremely interested in investing in myself and my wellness. And then I have a daughter, and I'm always doing the work for us and for other Black women.
Yeah.
And the reality is, we download all of this information about who we're supposed to be in the world very early on,
Yeah.
and we don't have the language really to understand it fully or to always critique it. And even if we do,
Yeah.
given the generation you grew up in, so I'm 47, right?
Yeah.
There's no room to be arguing back. There's
Oh
no
no.
room to have like critical conversation.
Mm-mm.
And so you wake up and you're 35 or you're 28 or you're 41, and you're like, wait, that I don't actually even feel that way. I don't really believe that.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't treat other people that way. So why am I still holding myself up to this standard?
Yeah.
But we had to do the intentional work of undoing all the things that we have been told, right? And I always say like
Yeah.
my biggest desire as a mom is to have my daughter do as little undoing and unlearning in her 30s and 20s or whatever as
Mm-hmm.
possible. So last year sometime, my mom took her shopping for some clothes. And so my daughter was a preemie, and
Okay.
she was a low birth weight preemie. And so for the first 7 years, literally it wasn't until the pandemic, the first 7 years, she was just always underweight. She just was thin, high metabolism. She started off small, and then she has a high metabolism, and so she just was itty bitty. But baby, I don't know if I think it's the pre puberty and all the things, but she hit her stride during the pandemic. Um, and so we went clothes shopping. She went clothes shop. I let them go have a Nana and girls' day when she was 9. So this was about a year ago. And so when she got some jeggings and she was like trying to jump and put them
Oh
on,
yeah.
and my mom started making comments about her body. And my daughter, with all of the confidence that I have raised her to have, looked at her and said, Nana, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm also wondering why you feel like talking about my body is up to you at all.
Ah, I love it.
Nana was shut down, honey.
Ah,
Nana
okay.
was like, oh well then. And she said, she said, and then and then I like quoted the Beyonce, if you don't jump to put jeans on, baby, you don't feel my pain, right?
Right.
Like as a way. She was like, that's right, mommy, I got a butt now, right?
Yes.
Like we're not doing that.
Mm-mm.
But I can only do that with my daughter because
Mm.
I have done my internal work on myself because
Yeah.
I grew up listening to the same things from my mother and my aunt and my cousins, right?
Yeah.
And so I could see the harm that had on me. I've been working on it. It's a constant work in progress,
Yeah.
right? To feel like in this body,
Mm-hmm.
I can take up space. In this body, I'm still worthy. In this body, I can wear things that feel good on this body. I can do those things. I don't care if you like it. I like it.
Yeah.
And so I am intentional about sharing that message over and over and over again with my daughter.
Yeah.
And she thinks she is the most beautiful thing. She thinks I am the most beautiful thing. She has no problem celebrating other Black women because that is just what she has grown up with. That's the bare minimum for us.
And that's where it starts. Like when we heal ourselves, we make it possible. We lessen the healing that the women to follow have to do.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
just yeah, that's because we inherit more than curses. We talk a
We
lot about
we
generational curses.
inherit both,
Yeah.
and I like to talk about intergenerational wounds and intergenerational trauma, um, to really name it, but we also have intergenerational resilience, and
Yeah.
we have ways of healing and taking care of ourselves too. And so we have to have the balance of both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right? Like, I am here because of my mother and the sacrifices that she made.
Yeah.
I am here because my mother made a way for me to be here in spite of all of what she had to live through, and my grandmother and my great grandmother, right? So we have to, I think it's really important that we honor
Mm-hmm.
the both and of
Yeah.
those things, right? And in the same way that, like, I was having a conversation with my mom earlier this week, and she said something, and something about, she sort of made like an offhand comment about something that had happened when she was younger, or I guess when I was little, I just blah 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 blah. And I said, Mama, that's trauma. And she was like, well, maybe I don't know. And I said, mm-mm. I said, I can name it for you.
Yeah.
That wasn't acceptable. You shouldn't have had to deal with that. And that's called a trauma.
Yeah.
She was like, well, okay. If you say so, then I guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like I could hear the wheels turning, right?
Yeah.
So in my role, I have the ability to be able to shape the generation in front of me, but I could also heal the generation behind me,
Yeah.
because in 76 years, no one has been, and I have been relentless about this lately with her. No one has, like, ever given permission for her pain to be named, right?
Yeah.
Or for her experiences to be named. We were talking recently about when she got her period for the first time. So, 9-year old, black girl, Southern Louisiana, didn't know anything about periods. Like, no, nobody had ever told her. She was clueless, right? And, like, shortly before, I don't know if it was like a couple days or a week, but shortly before she got her period, she had had her first kiss with a boy. And when she
Oh.
got her period, she assumed she was being punished. She was like, I shouldn't have let him kiss me. That was wrong. I'm nasty. And now look at this. This is my punishment. And so she had her first menstrual cycle and didn't tell anybody for days because of so much shame.
Mm.
And I got to name that, Mama, that's trauma.
Yeah.
That shouldn't have been your story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sad that happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I get to
Yeah.
be a space for her to re-envision herself and reconsider what she's been
Mm-hmm.
through that she never had a space to name, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she's like, for years later, I remember just being like, I didn't want to boys to touch me or do anything like that, because even when I knew better, I still felt, right, that
That
shame.
feeling. Yeah.
So that's why I was talking earlier about how our messages around shame are about what we say, but they're also about what we see and know, right? So that nobody talked to her about it, no one told her about her body.
Mm-hmm.
In the silence, we all have to make meaning of what's happening to us. And if you have only heard that interactions with a boy or having any sort of romantic or crush
Yeah.
type of feelings or anything like that with your body is bad or wrong, then of course it's your fault, right? That makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. So
And
we
I
have so
love,
much unpacking to do.
wow. Like, I mean, I love that you mentioned connecting with your mom and naming her pain and her
Hmm.
experience, because I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk a
Yeah.
lot about healing ourselves and younger women, but there are a lot of other women who are still suffering and still
Hmm.
directly impacted because no one ever gave them permission to revisit these experiences they've had and just invalidate their feelings and say, you know what,
Yes.
this wasn't your fault.
No.
Yeah.
I will be honest in saying that my therapist helped me figure that part out. Like, I I was talking to her about, like, ever since I've had my daughter, my relationship with my mother has changed, right? Um, and I see this happening and I see that happening. And so bringing that into therapy and really starting to think through it, my therapist sort of saying, you know, we're talking a lot about your own self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
but you can also demonstrate compassion to your mother, right? Like, that
Yeah.
demonstration is healing.
Mm-hmm.
And how, get curious about her and what, like, she's not the way she is just because,
Right.
the points of pain that you have in your relationship or the disconnect that you have aren't just because, like, there's a story there.
Yeah.
And there's, it's not like my mother and I weren't close and like I hadn't asked questions, but something about that ability to heal generationally forward and generationally back. Like, once I got that information, I was like, oh, okay, now I understand my role in a very different way. Because I will be honest, and and this would show up in my work with my clients too, and thinking about not necessarily sort of vilifying our mothers, but not seeing the whole picture, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of folks in our generation, I'm Gen X,
Yeah.
and I would even probably say older millennials, we've inherited a lot of pain
Yeah.
from our parents and
Yeah.
from our mothers. We have mother wounds, and we have to own that and acknowledge that. But it wasn't until I started to be able to say, wait a minute, but she's a whole woman who has lived in this country, in this context, with all the other shit that I'm sorry, I don't even know if I can
Oh
curse on
yeah,
your
you can say
podcast.
yeah, you
Okay.
can. This is a grown folks podcast.
Girl was good. But with all the other shit, but with
Yeah.
far less resources, like mental health, therapy, even like
Yeah.
FMLA, like just
Ooh, ain't
benefits,
have
like
it.
just basic things. Self care, that what? Like none of that
Yeah.
was anywhere on the table for women that are baby boomers or
Yeah.
older, right? And so, and black women in particular,
Yeah.
what, there was no space for
Yeah.
you for any of that. You just push on,
Yeah.
you just show up as strong, and you just get it done.
No
And
space, no
so I was like, wait a
protection,
minute,
none of that.
none,
Yeah,
none of
none.
that.
I mean, I remember that like in the 80s when you had a situation, if you had a domestic violence situation with your husband, because it was I know I saw this, the police would come and they would say, "Oh, well, this is your husband. You go take a walk. Tell him to go take a walk because this is your husband."
That's it.
There was no protection, particularly of black women during that time. So you were literally your family in a lot of instances. People didn't get involved in what was happening in other people's households. That's your
Mm-mm.
household. And you certainly didn't go
Exactly.
tell other people about what was happening in your household. So
No.
you grew up, I know I grew up saying, you're on, as a black woman, you on your own.
You better figure it out. I remember I had a major heartbreak one time. And my mom was like, baby, I don't know what to tell you. Like, she literally was like, I don't,
It's,
like, she was like,
hey, it's part of
move
life.
on. Like, she was like, I'm not trying to be harsh, but he don't want you. Move
Yeah.
on, right? It
That's,
wasn't, 'cause that was it. That really, and I took it for what it was at the time. Like, she's not saying she didn't want to be here for me. What she's saying is, I have no well from which to draw from. I don't have any angle or
yeah.
lens on this to give you support in.
Yeah.
I love you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry you're in pain, but that's all I
I
got,
got.
right? Because that sort of stuff is a luxury. And even um she'll say, talking about that shame piece, right? So like it's even with me being a sex positive, and I'm a sex self-confidence coach, and I believe in all of that, and I want us to get all
Yeah.
the goodies and be living our best sexual lives. That sort of external lens on, like, am I going to be respected? Are people going to take me seriously?
Yeah.
Am I going to be disrespected by men because I'm talking about this openly? Are
Yeah.
women going to like think less of me? Like, that stuff is still here. I had to
Yeah.
actively um like remind myself, right? Like, that's not me, that's not my values. I'm not listening to that. And so when my mom will say things like, oh, I saw this article and they were talking about something with women, and I thought you might want to use that with your clients. Like, it's so joyful for me that she, like,
Wow.
that she knows. And my daughter, she doesn't know, she doesn't get the like sex part, but she gets
Yeah.
like, you talk to black women about centering their joy and pleasure and things that make them
Oh,
feel good. And
yeah.
so we got a whole little multi-generational healing circle happening here. And I continue to do it because I can see how it benefits all of us, right? We're all rising and evolving and healing together. And it's
Yeah.
made our relationships um, across generations just so much better. We're all like more empowered in ourselves. And so I think that's really, really important work that needs to be done.
It is. It's essential, and I love the connection there. because sometimes we just try to move on and we leave others behind.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't have to do that. Yeah, we don't have to do
No.
that.
Yeah. I mean, community is so important. Um, like, you know, we got a lot of differences in the black community, right? And
Hmm.
we got a lot of stuff we deal with, but we always know we one people, right?
Yes, when it come
Like,
down to it.
exactly. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, we
Right.
know it's us and
Yeah.
there's them. We don't,
Yep.
that part is really, really,
Yes.
really clear. And so I'm like, well, how do we leverage
Yeah.
that? Then if that's the case, let it be for
Hmm.
our best good. Like
Yep.
let it be for our own upliftment. Let it be for our
Hmm.
own betterment. And we can be proactive in making that happen.
Yeah. We absolutely can. By having like these honest conversations and challenging the things that we've held near and dear for so long, like
Yes,
those social constructs and religious
exactly.
implications. And one of the things I've been going back and forth, and I think I might move forward with doing this, I've been wanting to have just a roundtable discussion about the impacts of religion on Black women because it just touches every, I mean, it's even, I
All
wouldn't
of it.
even consider myself a religious person, especially not as an adult. But there are still so many things that I think about because of what I was taught as a
Mm-hmm.
child as it pertains to how God would perceive me and being in this way or living in this way or even feeling this way. It's like, ooh, is there a place for like physical pleasure, especially sexuality when we talk about
Yeah.
being someone who God would shine favor on? Like, can those
Mm-hmm.
things coexist? All of those different struggles. And
Yeah.
nobody loves Jesus like Black folks do. It's
Baby.
just,
Ah!
oh my God.
No, nobody loved Jesus like black
Nobody.
folks.
Nobody.
Whoo-wee, yes. It's and so here's the thing. This is what I always say. One, I always out myself. Like I don't identify as Christian.
Yeah.
I do identify as a person who fully understands there is a higher power that I call on a regular basis that centers my sense of self, my morality,
Yeah.
my understanding of the world. But the religion, the dogma of
Mhm.
Christianity never, even when I was a kid, never sat well on me, right? Like I
Yeah.
always had questions and always challenged. And then the um the observations I had as a young person about what was being said about Jesus and how to treat people and how I saw people treating each other in the
Mm.
church. I was like, well,
Huh. Is that what Jesus
ain't
would do?
nobody in here doing the things y'all say we supposed to be doing. Cause I hear y'all backstabbing and talking about and pulling down. Y'all get in this church parking lot after service every Sunday and talk about everybody in this parking lot. And then when they come up to you, they see you smile and hug and all this sort of stuff. But I done heard the shit you said, right? So the hypocrisy of that always
Mhm.
stood out to me,
Yeah.
right? And then even about like it wasn't for me growing up, it wasn't about sex or sexuality to begin with. But one of the things that I could never wrap my brain around was like, we're understanding God from our perspective, but there's different people all around the world.
Yes.
And the only way to salvation, the only way to life after death is if everybody has to know this way of seeing God.
Yeah.
That don't make no sense to me. I was like, what
Yeah.
about places where people don't even read books or have never heard of Jesus? Like
Yeah.
they don't get like these were the questions
Yeah.
I was asking as a
Hmm.
child that would get me in trouble. And so it wasn't that much of I think a leap for me to be able to
Hmm.
say, well, access to my body and what feels like that shouldn't be anybody else's business. I don't see how the church has anything to do with this. So I think that like sort of way of seeing the world allowed me to have like a side step where I
Yeah.
didn't have to have a lot of the stuff internalized. And so what I want to say shows up both ways in my practice or just in my experience with women around this work is one, sometimes the messages are very direct, right? You're supposed to save your save yourself from marriage,
Yeah.
um and this whole idea around soul ties, and you're opening yourself up there. I know there's a lot of explicit messaging around that, but there's also, like you're alluding to, is there's a lot of indirect messages. So it might not be Jesus said, but the message has come through someone else that's informed by the religion.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know that any of us can grow up without having heard or being sort of judged under that part of the religious umbrella. Um, and it takes intentional self reflection to sort of have that conversation. And so what I always tell folks is, what's in alignment with your values? Like when you get quiet and still, does it feel like you are wrong? Or does it feel like you have been told your desires are wrong? And if we can look at the difference between those two things, then let's think about what might be the benefit to broader systems and individual people for you to feel ashamed about your body,
Yeah.
and how that might not actually be your benefit, and what you want to do different. Because when we talk about being sex positive, we're talking about um, you being able to show up as your authentic sexual self, period. For some people, that's going to be, actually, my values are that I want to be in sexual relationship with one man or one person, because that's a value for me.
Right.
For other people, it could be, I don't need to be all the way out there, but I want to dibble and dabble a little bit before I decide. And for other people, it may be, I like a wide variety of partners and I like to do a wide variety of things. We have to make space for everybody.
Yeah.
And my whole thing is, it has to just be authentic.
Yeah.
If it is coming from who you are and what feels affirming and good for you, and you are doing it in consensual ways, you're doing it in ways that bring intimacy and connection and joy, then you write the script.
Yeah.
Silence all those other voices. You write the script for yourself.
Yeah. And that's why, I had somebody ask me once, they listened to an episode where we talked about just, sex positivity, and the person said, well, why are we all talking about therapy and everything? And I thought y'all were going to talk about, getting freaky, getting it down and all this, how to throw it back. And I'm like, well, you can't skip to that. That's the problem. We skip to that before we deal with
So
all
then
the
we
things
throwing
in
it
our
back.
head. Yeah.
Exactly. We throwing it back and then feeling shame about it. Then feeling like we're not worthy.
Yeah.
Then feeling disappointed in ourselves. All the things.
Or you're throwing it back and
All
you ain't
the
even
things.
enjoying it. Like it's because again you're feeling the shame. You haven't taken the time to understand what you want. You haven't taken the time to understand your body. You haven't taken the
Yeah.
time to learn how to communicate with your partner. So it's like we can't jump to talking about sex positions before we start talking about like where your mind is, where your heart is.
All of those things. So, Charlene, unfortunately, I have a hard stop. I know I personally could have gone another hour, but I was like, I gotta go.
Good. No, thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely would
You
love to
were
chat with you again. So
welcome.
thank you so much.
Yes, please keep me in touch. I'm happy to come back again and have a part two,
Yeah.
or look at another part, because we can't have enough conversation about this stuff at
Yes.
all.
So thank you.
You're welcome.